My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 75 years old, and my own son drove me deep into the Appalachian Mountains, dumped me at a derelict cabin, and told me it was what I deserved. Before I tell you how that same son called me 45 times just a few days later, his voice hysterical and screaming, "Mom, what did you do?" Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The sound of the gravel crunching under his tires as he sped away is something I'll never forget. I just stood there, a small suitcase at my feet, watching the dust cloud settle. There was a coldness that had nothing to do with the mountain air. It was the coldness of finality. "This is what you deserve, you useless old woman." The words echoed in the sudden silence, sharper than the wind whipping through the pines. I could still see his face in the rearview mirror, not angry, not sad, just empty, as if he were dropping off a piece of old furniture at the dump. This cabin. This was supposed to be our happy place. My late husband, Frank, and I had built it with our own hands, log by log, nail by nail. Now the porch sagged like a tired old man, and the windows were dark, hollow eyes staring back at me. This place, once filled with laughter and the smell of wood smoke, was now my prison. And my own son held the key. To understand how a son could do this, you have to understand the hands that raised him. My hands. They aren't soft. They're a roadmap of a life spent in a North Carolina textile mill. Calloused and scarred from 40 years of feeding raw cotton into roaring machines, of pulling levers and tying threads until my fingers were numb. Every penny I earned, every overtime shift I pulled was for him. For Kevin. I wanted him to have a life where his hands stayed soft. I wanted him to go to college, to wear a suit, to be someone important. Frank, my sweet Frank, he understood. He was a carpenter, his hands just as rough as mine, and he'd always hold them and say, "Eleanor, these hands built a future." He loved this land, this mountain. He'd walk me through the woods, pointing out the different trees, telling me about the spring deep in the hollow. "This land has secrets, Ellie," he used to say with a wink. Good secrets. At the time I thought he was just being romantic. I had no idea he was planting the seeds of my survival. I thought my sacrifice would earn me his respect, his gratitude. But I was wrong. The ambition I had nurtured in him had grown into a poison, and it had been seeping into his heart for years. I stood there on that crumbling porch for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the mountains pressing in. Despair is a heavy blanket. It tries to smother you, to make you lie down and give up. I looked at the broken door, the darkness within, and a part of me wanted to do just that. Just sink to my knees and let the wilderness take me. But then I looked down at my own two hands. The roadmap. The hands that had changed his diapers, packed his lunches, and paid for the education that made him too good for me. The same hands that had held Frank's as he took his last breath. And I knew right then that this was not where my story ended. This was not the legacy Frank would have wanted. Anger, cold and pure, began to burn away the despair. I walked over to the rotten woodpile by the fireplace, my mind already working. I reached for the old, heavy axe Frank had left behind. My fingers curled around the worn handle and I wasn't thinking of violence. I was thinking of survival. My first thought wasn't about him, it was about the cold. The kind of deep, damp cold that seeps into your bones when a mountain cabin has been left to rot. Frank always said, "A fire is life, Ellie." So I swung the axe. The thud of the blade biting into the old pine log was satisfying. It was a sound of purpose. With each swing I felt less like a victim and more like me. My hands, they know this work. They might look like a wrinkled, spotted mess to some, but they're the truest story I'll ever tell. For 40 years I stood on the concrete floor of the Cannon Mills plant over in Kannapolis. The roar of the looms was a constant companion, a sound so loud it vibrated in your chest. The air was always thick with lint, like a perpetual indoor snowstorm, and I'd come home with the smell of machine oil ground deep into my skin. Frank used to joke he could tell what kind of thread we were running that day just by the smell of my hair. It was brutal work. Backbreaking. But every time I looked at the paycheck with its pathetic numbers, I didn't see a salary. I saw Kevin's future. I saw new shoes when he'd worn his old ones down to the sole. I saw books for school. I saw the tuition for North Carolina State University. I saw the life I was weaving for him, thread by painful thread. A life far away from the factory floor. I wanted his biggest complaint to be a paper cut from a textbook, not a splinter from a wooden loom. Frank was the heart of our little world. While I was at the mill, he was out here, a master carpenter, his hands just as gnarled as mine, but capable of such gentleness. He could turn a rough piece of oak into a velvet-smooth rocking chair. He built this cabin as a weekend getaway for us, a place to escape the noise and the dust. At night, after a long shift, he'd be the one to rub my aching feet. He'd look at my hands, not with disgust like Kevin later would, but with a kind of reverence. "These hands built a future, Eleanor," he'd say, echoing his own words from years before. "Our boy is going to be someone because of these hands." We were a team. We believed in the simple gospel of hard work and family. And we believed in this land. It wasn't just dirt and trees to Frank. It was a living thing. He taught me everything. He showed me the towering black walnut trees deep in the woods behind the cabin. "That's the king of the forest, Ellie," he'd murmur, running his hand over the dark, furrowed bark. "Worth a fortune, but more beautiful standing right here. He's the one who found the little spring that trickled out from behind a mossy rock face. The water was always ice-cold and had a strange, mineral taste. Funny tasting water," he'd laugh. "Bet it's full of good stuff from deep in the earth." Back then they were just moments. Just a husband sharing his love for his home with his wife. I didn't know he was giving me a map. I didn't know he was leaving me the keys to my salvation. I thought that love and sacrifice were a shield, a fortress we had built around our family. I never imagined the real threat wasn't from the outside world, but that it was already inside the walls, growing right under my own roof. The change in Kevin didn't happen overnight. It was a slow poisoning. It started when he went off to college in Raleigh. The first time he came home for Thanksgiving, he brought a friend. I'd spent 2 days cooking. As I set a big platter of fried chicken on the table, I saw him flinch just for a second when his friend asked me what I did for a living. "My mom, she's retired," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. It was the first lie. A small one, but it felt like a stone in my shoe for the rest of the visit. Then came Tiffany. He brought her home a few years later. She was from a wealthy family in Charlotte, and she looked at our small, tidy home like it was something she'd seen in a documentary about poor people. She was polite, but it was a brittle, polished kind of politeness. I remember she wouldn't set her expensive leather handbag on our floor. She held it in her lap the entire time. When I offered her a slice of my famous pecan pie, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I couldn't possibly. All that sugar." She talked about brands I'd never heard of, vacations to places I couldn't pronounce. Kevin just watched her, his eyes full of a kind of desperate adoration. He was a different person around her. His voice was smoother, his posture straighter. He was performing. And I, his mother, with my rough hands and my mill worker past, was a stain on his new perfect life. The real shift happened after Frank was gone. His heart just gave out one Tuesday morning. A heart attack, swift and brutal. The grief was a physical thing. It hollowed me out, leaving me empty and echoing. Kevin and Tiffany swooped in, full of performative sorrow. They handled the funeral arrangements, they managed the house. They were the perfect, grieving son and daughter-in-law. But I saw things. At the funeral, while people were offering me their condolences, I saw the two of them in a corner whispering not about Frank but about papers. Tiffany was pointing at a line on a document, her brow furrowed in concentration. The next day, I found Kevin in Frank's old study, not looking at photo albums, but at bank statements and the deed to our house. When he saw me, he quickly shuffled the papers away, a flash of irritation crossing his face before he replaced it with a sad smile. It was all a show. Their grief was a mask for their greed. They saw my sorrow not as a wound to be tended, but as an opportunity, a window of weakness they could climb through. The day after we buried my Frank, Kevin sat me down in our living room. He held my hand, the same hand he used to be ashamed of, and looked at me with what I desperately wanted to believe were sincere, tear-filled eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you can't stay here alone. It's not safe. You need to come live with us in Charlotte. Let me take care of you. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll handle everything from now on." He squeezed my hand. I was so broken, so lost without Frank, that his words felt like a lifeline. I nodded, tears streaming down my face, and thanked him. I thanked my wonderful, caring son. Looking back now, I realize his tears were real, but not from grief for his father. They were tears of triumph. It wasn't a promise of comfort he was making. It was a declaration of ownership. And I had just become his most valuable inheritance. The move to Charlotte felt like being transplanted into alien soil. My little house, the one Frank and I had paid off over 30 years, was sold in a week. Kevin said the money was put into a safer investment for my future. I left behind my neighbors, my garden, my whole life, for a bedroom in their enormous sterile house in a gated community. The walls were all white, the furniture looked like it was from a museum, and there wasn't a single family photo on the walls. It was a house, not a home. It felt cold, and I soon learned that the house was just a reflection of the people living in it. The first few weeks they laid the trap carefully. Tiffany would make my favorite meals. Kevin would sit with me in the evenings and ask about his father. It was all so perfect, so loving. It was a lie. The paperwork started soon after. Kevin would come to me with a folder full of documents, sitting me down at their massive glass dining table. "Mom, this is just to put my name on your bank account, so I can pay your bills for you. You shouldn't have to worry about these things anymore," he'd say, his voice smooth as honey. I was still in a fog of grief, and honestly I didn't want to deal with it. I trusted him. He was my son. I signed where he pointed. Then came another set of papers. "This is for your pension, Mom. It's better if it's managed with my investment portfolio. We'll get a better return." I hesitated for a moment. Frank always handled our finances. I felt a pang of uncertainty. Seeing my hesitation, Tiffany chimed in from the doorway. "Eleanor, Kevin is so good with money. He just wants what's best for you. Don't you trust your own son?" The guilt was a sharp hook. Of course I trusted him. I signed. The final one was the cruelest. He brought me a document and told me it was just a formality related to the sale of my old house. He was talking on his phone at the same time, distracted, making it seem unimportant. He just slid it in front of me with a pen. "Just sign at the bottom, Mom." I was tired, I was grieving, and I was foolish. I signed over the deed to the one thing I had left, the 80 acres of mountain land with our family cabin on it. I had just given him the weapon he would use to destroy me. The isolation was gradual but total. The landline in my room suddenly developed static and was never fixed. When my old neighbor from Kannapolis called my cell, Tiffany would answer, sweetly explaining that I was resting and couldn't be disturbed. My world shrank until it was just the four walls of my basement room. They controlled what I ate, who I spoke to, and where I went. I wasn't a mother living with her son. I was an inmate. And my financial independence, my entire life savings, had become my prison budget, managed by my warden. Late one night I couldn't sleep. The silence of that big house was deafening. I crept upstairs to get a glass of water and heard their voices coming from the den. I pressed my ear to the door. It was Tiffany's sharp, impatient whisper. "Is it done? Is everything in your name now? The deed to the mountain property, too?" "Yes, all of it," Kevin replied, his voice low. "She signed the last paper today. She has no idea." There was a pause, and then I heard Tiffany laugh. A short, triumphant little sound. "Good. Now we can finally move forward with the plan. How soon can we get rid of her?" The floor felt like it had dropped out from under me. The cold from the polished hardwood seeped right into my soul. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I was a problem to be managed, a temporary inconvenience on the path to their fortune. I was a prisoner, and I had just overheard them planning my exile. After that night, the masks came off completely. The pretense of caring was gone, replaced by a cold, weary tolerance, as if my very presence was an exhausting chore. My life became a series of small, daily humiliations designed to make me feel worthless. Tiffany was the architect of my misery. She started with my food. No longer would she make my favorites. Instead, she would leave a plate for me on the counter, often just the leftovers from their own dinner, cold and congealed. One evening, after they'd had steak, my plate consisted of a few pieces of gristle and some overcooked asparagus. "Hope you enjoy it, Eleanor," she'd said without looking at me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Wouldn't want you to waste away." My laundry was another battleground. She complained that my old people clothes smelled funny and made me wash them separately, after they had finished with theirs, as if my scent might contaminate their expensive designer outfits. I was forbidden from sitting on the white leather sofa in the living room. Your clothes might have dust on them from the basement, Tiffany explained, her eyes scanning me up and down with obvious distaste. So I spent my days in the cold, damp basement room they'd given me, with its single high window that only showed the feet of people walking by outside. Kevin was worse in a way. He ignored me. He would walk past me in the hallway as if I were a ghost, his eyes fixed on his phone. The only time he spoke to me was to criticize. Mom, do you have to shuffle your feet like that? The noise is annoying. Or, Mom, Tiffany says you left a water ring on the coffee table. You need to be more careful. This is expensive furniture. He, the boy whose education I had paid for with the sweat of my body, was now treating me like a senile, burdensome child. The worst part was hearing them talk about me. They thought I was deaf or stupid. They'd stand in the kitchen, just at the top of the basement stairs, and discuss my fate as if I were a stray dog they'd taken in. One afternoon I heard Tiffany's voice, sharp and clear. We have to get her out of here, Kevin. The buyers for the mountain property are getting serious. They want to see it next week. We can't have her hanging around claiming it's hers. Buyers? They were selling my land? Frank's land? A hot, helpless rage filled me. I know, Kevin sighed. His voice was tired, not with guilt but with irritation. I'm working on it. It's not easy to just place an old person somewhere. Well, work faster, she snapped. I saw an ad for a place called Golden Meadows Retirement Home. It looks affordable. We can use what's left of her savings for the down payment. It's perfect. It's out of the way. No one will even know. Golden Meadows. The name was supposed to sound peaceful, but it sounded like a prison sentence. They were planning to take the last of my money to lock me away in some facility so they could sell the last piece of my life with Frank. They weren't just taking my inheritance. They were trying to erase my entire existence. I sat there on the edge of my lumpy basement bed, my hands clenched into fists. I felt the calluses, the scars, the history of a life of hard work. And I thought of Frank. What would he do? Frank was a fighter. He never backed down from a bully. That night I decided I wouldn't either. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to fight back. I had to get out of there. I started making a plan. I would call my old neighbor Mr. Peterson. I would find a way. But I was too slow. Before I could put my plan into action, they came for me. The very next morning, Kevin came down the stairs. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. He was wearing jeans and a jacket. He had a look on his face I'd never seen before, a grim, determined coldness. Get your things, Mom, he said, his voice flat. We're going for a drive. A drive? Where are we going? I asked, my heart starting to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. We're going to see a specialist, he said, not meeting my eyes. About your memory. Tiffany and I are worried about you. It was a lie and we both knew it. This wasn't a doctor's visit. This was an eviction. This was the final step in their plan. I thought about screaming, about refusing to go. But then I saw Tiffany standing at the top of the stairs, her arms crossed, a smug, triumphant little smile on her face. I knew right then that fighting here in their house was pointless. I would be a hysterical old woman just as they wanted everyone to believe. So I silently packed a small bag with a few changes of clothes and my picture of Frank. The drive was silent for the first hour. I watched the polished suburbs of Charlotte give way to highways, then to smaller country roads. I watched the landscape change from manicured lawns to rolling farmland, and then begin to climb into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. The trees grew thicker, the road narrower. My hopes sank with every mile we drove deeper into the wilderness. I tried one more time. Kevin, please. Whatever you're planning, we can talk about this. I'm your mother. He finally looked at me. The emptiness in his eyes was terrifying. There's nothing to talk about, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. This is for the best. You need a quiet place. Less stress. A quiet place? Kevin, where are you taking me? He didn't answer. He just turned his attention back to the winding road. We drove for another hour, the cell service long gone. We were in the middle of nowhere. Finally, he turned down a dirt road I recognized with a sickening jolt. It was the old logging path that led to our cabin. The car bumped and scraped along the overgrown track, branches scratching at the windows like skeletal fingers. And then there it was. The cabin. It looked even worse than I remembered. A shutter hung from a single hinge, and the porch roof had collapsed on one side. It was a ruin. A tomb. Kevin got out of the car and opened my door. He pulled me out, not roughly, but with an impersonal efficiency like a delivery driver unloading cargo. He set my small bag on the damp ground. I looked from the decaying cabin to my son's blank face. The reality of the situation crashed down on me. "You can't," I whispered, the words getting caught in my throat. "You can't leave me here. There's no power, no water. Kevin, I'll die here." He shrugged, a small, indifferent gesture. "You're tougher than you look." He got back in the car and started the engine. He rolled down the window, and for the last time he spoke to me. It wasn't the voice of my son. It was the voice of a stranger, a judge passing sentence. "This is what you deserve, you useless old woman." And then he was gone. I stood there, alone, the sound of his engine fading until the only thing left was the whisper of the wind through the pines and the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. I was 75 years old, and my son had just left me to die in the wilderness. That first night was the longest of my life. The cold was a physical entity, a predator that gnawed at me. I found an old, rust-stained mattress in one of the rooms, crawling with bugs, and I huddled under a few moth-eaten blankets I found in a chest. Every creak of the old cabin, every rustle in the woods outside, sent a jolt of terror through me. I was sure I wouldn't live to see the morning. I thought about Kevin and Tiffany in their warm, comfortable bed, probably celebrating their freedom, their victory. I wept. Not loud sobs, just silent, hot tears that froze on my cheeks. I cried for Frank. I cried for the son I had lost. And I cried for the foolish woman who had trusted him. I thought that was it. I thought my story would end there, a pile of bones for some hiker to find years later. But as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the grimy windows, something inside me shifted. The grief was still there, but underneath it, a tiny hard ember of anger began to glow. He called me useless. He said this is what I deserved. As I lay there shivering, I remembered Frank's words, his voice a warm memory in the freezing cold. "This land has secrets, Ellie. Good secrets." I didn't know what those secrets were, but I knew one thing for sure. I would not die here. I would not let them win. Survival mode kicks in when you have no other choice. The grief and shock were still there, but they became a luxury I couldn't afford. The first order of business was fire. The second was food. The third was figuring out what the hell I was going to do. I used the axe. My back screamed in protest, but I chopped enough wood to keep a small, smoky fire going in the old stone fireplace. I found some old canned goods in a dusty pantry. Beans mostly, and some peaches from a summer long ago. The cans were swollen, but I was hungry enough to risk it. I found the spring Frank had shown me, the one with the funny-tasting water. It was clear and cold, and it became my lifeline. Each day I forced myself into a routine. Wake up. Get water. Forage for more wood. Eat a small portion of beans. Explore a little more of the property. At night, I'd sit by the fire and talk to Frank as if he were sitting right there in his old rocking chair. It was the only thing that kept the madness at bay. After a week, I knew I couldn't survive on rusty cans of beans forever. I found an old walking stick Frank had carved and I started the long trek to the nearest town, a tiny little place called Laurel Creek, about 5 miles down the mountain. Took me almost 4 hours. When I walked into the town's only general store, the man behind the counter looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. He was an older man, his face a friendly roadmap of wrinkles. "My God," he said, squinting. "Eleanor Vance? Is that really you?" It was Hank Peterson. He and his late wife used to be our closest neighbors up here, before they sold their place and moved into town. He was Frank's best friend. Tears welled in my eyes. I was so relieved to see a friendly face I almost collapsed. I didn't tell him the whole truth. I was too ashamed. I just said that Kevin had dropped me off for a retreat, and that my phone had died. He didn't buy it for a second. He saw the desperation in my eyes, the way my clothes hung off my thin frame. "A retreat? Eleanor, you look like you've been through a war," he said gently. He sat me down, gave me a hot cup of coffee and a sandwich that tasted like the best meal I'd ever had. He insisted on driving me back to the cabin, his old pickup truck rattling up the dirt road. When he saw the state of the place and my meager supplies, his face hardened. "This is no retreat," he said, his voice low and angry. "That boy of yours has a lot to answer for." Mr. Peterson became my savior. He came up every other day, bringing groceries, blankets, and news from the outside world. He helped me secure the cabin, patching the roof and boarding up the broken windows. With his help, the place started to feel less like a tomb and more like a fortress. With my strength returning, so did my memories of Frank's words. One afternoon, I took Mr. Peterson on a walk to the back of the property, to the grove of black walnut trees. He whistled long and low. "Good Lord, Eleanor. Do you know what you have here? These are old growth. I haven't seen trees like this in 30 years. There's a fortune in this timber." Fortune. The word hung in the air. Later, I had him try the water from the spring. He took a sip, swished it around, and his eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be," he said. "That's not just spring water. That's mineral water. Tastes just like the expensive stuff they sell in bottles. A fortune in timber. A mineral spring. The secrets of the land." It was all real. Frank had left me everything I needed. Kevin, in his arrogant greed, had thrown me into a briar patch, but he had no idea it was full of diamonds. He thought he was abandoning me on a worthless piece of land. He had no idea he had just dumped me on a gold mine. I felt a surge of power, of purpose. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. But I didn't know that Kevin and Tiffany were already launching their next attack. And this one wasn't aimed at my body but at my mind. It was a move more insidious, more cruel than anything they had done before. Just as I started to feel a flicker of hope, the black sedan appeared. It drove up the bumpy dirt road slowly, cautiously, as if it didn't belong in the wilderness. I was outside, mending a broken fence with some wire Mr. Peterson had brought me, and I watched it approach with a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. A woman in a navy blue pantsuit got out. She carried a leather portfolio and had a kind, but distinctly official, look on her face. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" she asked, her voice pleasant but firm. "Yes. My name is Carol Albright. I'm with Adult Protective Services for the state of North Carolina." Adult Protective Services. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the fence post to keep my knees from buckling. I knew instantly who had sent her. This was Tiffany's work. This was their checkmate. "We received an anonymous report," Ms. Albright continued, her eyes scanning the rustic, but now tidy area around the cabin. "The report expressed serious concerns about your welfare. It alleged that you were living in unsafe conditions, suffering from delusions, and were mentally unfit to care for yourself." Mentally unfit. Delusions. The accusations were so vile, so calculated, it took my breath away. They hadn't just abandoned me. They were now trying to have me declared insane. It was a strategy of pure evil. If they could prove I was incompetent, they could get power of attorney, sell the land without any resistance, and lock me away for good. My son was trying to have me legally erased. For a second, panic seized me. I saw it all playing out. This kind-faced woman judging my patched-up life, seeing only a crazy old woman living in squalor, just as Kevin and Tiffany had described. I saw the sterile white walls of a state-run facility. But then the anger kicked in again. A cold, clear rage that burned away the fear. They would not win. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice shaking only slightly, "the only thing I am suffering from is a cruel son and a greedy daughter-in-law. Would you like to come inside? I'll show you my unsafe conditions." I led her into the cabin. It was humble, but it was clean. The fire was crackling warmly. The pantry was neatly stocked with the supplies Mr. Peterson had brought. I showed her the fresh water from the spring. I explained calmly and rationally how I had been managing on my own. I told her about my daily routine, about my plans to fix up the property. I didn't sound delusional. I sounded determined. She listened patiently, making notes in her portfolio. She was professional, her face unreadable. I could tell she was torn between the official report on her desk and the coherent old woman standing in front of her. Just then, we heard the familiar rattle of Mr. Peterson's pickup truck coming up the road. He got out, carrying a box of fresh vegetables from his garden. He stopped short when he saw the official-looking car and Ms. Albright. "Eleanor? Everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. "This is Ms. Albright from Adult Protective Services. Hank," I explained. "She's here because someone reported that I'm mentally unfit." Mr. Peterson's friendly face turned to stone. He turned to Ms. Albright. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rumbling with indignation. "I've known Eleanor Vance for over 40 years. Her husband was my best friend. Let me tell you something. This woman is sharper than most folks half her age. She's been through hell, and she's not just surviving, she's fighting. The only people unfit are the ones who put her here. Her son Kevin. You want to investigate someone, you go investigate him. He was a force of nature, his honesty and anger undeniable. He became my character witness right there on the crumbling porch. He told her about my resilience, about our plans to assess the timber." Ms. Albright looked from Mr. Peterson's furious face to my calm one. She closed her portfolio with a soft snap. "Mrs. Vance," she said, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. "Thank you for your time. Based on my assessment and Mr. Peterson's statement, I see no reason for APS to be involved here. The report seems to have been malicious in its intent. I will be closing this case." Relief washed over me so intensely I felt dizzy. I had won. I had faced down their most vicious attack and won. As Ms. Albright's car disappeared down the road, the fear was replaced by something else. A cold, hard resolve. Kevin and Tiffany hadn't just tried to get rid of me. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to strip me of my own mind. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because they had shown me that there was no line they wouldn't cross. And in doing so, they had freed me from any last shred of maternal obligation. The fight was no longer about survival. It was about taking back everything they had stolen from me. And I knew my first call had to be to a lawyer. Mr. Peterson knew a guy in town, a young, hungry lawyer named Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't from a big, fancy firm in Charlotte. She was a local girl who had come home to practice law, and she had a reputation for being a bulldog when it came to fighting for the little guy. I sat in her small, tidy office, the smell of old books and fresh coffee in the air, and I told her everything. I told her about the mill, about Frank, about Kevin and Tiffany. I told her about the manipulated documents, the inheritance, the abandonment, and the final cruel straw, the call to Adult Protective Services. As I spoke, I watched her expression change from professional sympathy to a focused, cold anger. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her pen flying across a legal pad. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Eleanor," she said finally, her voice firm, "what they did isn't just immoral. It's illegal. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraudulent conveyance. The list is long. We're going to fight this. And we're going to win." For the first time in months, I felt like I had an army on my side. Sarah's first piece of advice was brilliant. "Before we file any lawsuits, we need to secure your biggest asset," she said. "The land. You've been living there, improving it, and you have a witness in Mr. Peterson. We can file a claim for adverse possession. It's a long shot, but your son abandoning you there actually strengthens your case. He effectively gave you possession." While Sarah started the legal paperwork, I got to work on my end. With a small loan from Mr. Peterson, I hired a professional timber appraiser and a hydrologist to analyze the spring water. The timber appraiser, a burly man named Gus, spent a day in the woods. When he came back to the cabin, his eyes were wide. "Ma'am," he said, taking off his hat, "you're sitting on one of the finest stands of mature black walnut I've seen in this state. Conservatively, the timber rights here are worth over $500,000. $500,000. I had to sit down. 2 days later, the report from the hydrologist came back. Sarah read it to me over the phone, her voice electric with excitement. "Eleanor, are you sitting down? The mineral content is off the charts. It's comparable to high-end European mineral waters. It's not just a spring. It's a commercial-grade bottling source. A beverage company would pay a fortune for the rights to this." I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Just a few weeks ago, I was shivering in a derelict cabin, surviving on canned beans. Now, I was a landowner with assets potentially worth millions. The irony was so thick I could taste it. And just as my star was rising, Kevin's was beginning to fall. Mr. Peterson, who had a network of friends all over the county, started hearing things. Rumors. Kevin's big real estate deal in Charlotte had collapsed. The company he had started, the one he was so proud of, was drowning in debt. He had apparently leveraged everything, including the anticipated sale of my mountain land, on this one deal. And now it was all gone. He was ruined. The son who had called me useless and discarded me was now the one who was truly worthless in the world of money and success he worshipped. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. I was the one with the valuable assets. I was the one with the power. He had nothing. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when my old, beat-up cell phone, the one Mr. Peterson had gotten me a new charger for, started ringing. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I had a feeling. I answered. The voice on the other end was choked, frantic. It was barely recognizable. Mom? Mom, is that you? It was Kevin. The desperation in his voice was a stark contrast to the cold, empty tone he'd used when he left me for dead. I didn't say anything. I just listened to the sound of his ragged breathing. The tables had officially turned. And I knew as I held the phone to my ear that the real battle was just about to begin. The calls didn't stop. After that first one, my phone buzzed incessantly. Kevin. Kevin. Missed call. Kevin. Voicemail full. It was a frantic, desperate symphony of his own making. For 3 days I let him call. I let him leave panicked, rambling voicemails. It was my turn to be silent. It was my turn to be unavailable. Each buzz of the phone was a small, satisfying confirmation that the world had righted itself on its axis. On the 4th day he showed up. His expensive German car was covered in mud from the mountain road. He himself looked like a wreck. His designer suit was rumpled, there were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The arrogant, dismissive man who had abandoned me was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out shell of a man, vibrating with desperation. He practically fell out of the car when he saw me sitting on the newly repaired porch, calmly sipping a cup of tea. Mom! He gasped, stumbling towards me. Thank God. I've been so worried. Worried. The audacity of that word almost made me laugh out loud. Were you worried when you left me here with no food and no heat, Kevin? Or did the worry only start when your bank account ran dry? My voice was calm, cold as the spring water. Stopped him in his tracks. The fake concern on his face melted away, replaced by raw, ugly desperation. He fell to his knees in the dirt in front of me. Right there. My son, who had looked down on me his whole life, was kneeling at my feet. Mom, I'm sorry, he sobbed. Actual racking sobs. I was a fool. I was arrogant. Tiffany, she got in my head. She pushed me to do it. It was her idea to sell the land, her idea to call Adult Protective Services and say I was insane? I finished for him, my voice still level. He flinched as if I had slapped him. Yes, he whispered, his head bowed in shame. But I know it was wrong. I see that now. Mom, I'm ruined. The company is gone. I'm going to lose the house. I'm going to lose everything. Please, you have to help me. That land, they say it's worth a lot of money. We're family. We can share it. Just like we were supposed to. He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears and dirt. He looked like a pathetic little boy. A part of me, the mother part that is buried so deep it can never be fully extinguished, felt a flicker of pity. But then I saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't sorry for what he did to me. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry his plan had backfired so spectacularly. His apology was just another tool, another form of manipulation. His tears were not for me. They were for his lost fortune. I stood up and looked down at him. Get up, Kevin, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. My husband, your father, never knelt to anyone, and you will not kneel to me. We are not a family that begs. He scrambled to his feet, looking hopeful, as if my words were a sign of forgiveness. He was wrong. You talk about family, I continued, my gaze unwavering. You talk about sharing. You had a chance to be a family. You had a chance to share a life with me, to care for me in my old age as a son should. And you chose to throw me away like a piece of trash because you thought I was worthless. Now you find out that the trash you threw away is actually treasure, and you come crawling back. That's not family, Kevin. That's a vulture. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a dawning horror. He was realizing that I was no longer the weak, grieving woman he could easily manipulate. "So what are you saying?" he stammered. "I'm saying that forgiveness is earned, not demanded," I replied. "And you, Kevin, have a long, long way to go." I gave him a final dismissive look. "Now get off my property." He stood there, stunned into silence, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had played his last card, and it wasn't enough. But I knew him. He wouldn't give up that easily. I knew he would try something else. And so, I decided to give him one final test, to see if there was even a single solitary shred of decency left in his soul. I knew, even as I planned it, that he was going to fail. 2 days later I called him. His voice was a mixture of shock and desperate hope. "Mom, I've been thinking, Kevin," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Maybe I was too harsh. You're still my son." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "The lawyer says the paperwork for the land is almost final, but things are complicated. I'm old. I don't understand all this business. I could use your help up here for a few days, just to sort through things. Help me fix up the place a bit." The silence on the other end was thick with his calculations. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "She's caving. She's a sentimental old fool. If I can get back up there, get back in her good graces, I can still get my hands on that money." "Of course, Mom," he said finally, his voice oozing with false sincerity. "Whatever you need. I'll be there tomorrow." He arrived the next morning, not in his fancy car, but in a rented pickup truck. He had changed into jeans and a work shirt. He was playing the part of the prodigal son, returned to make amends. For 3 days he worked. He chopped wood, he helped me patch the last of the holes in the roof, he cleared the brush from around the cabin. He was a model's son. He was respectful, attentive, and constantly telling me how sorry he was. "I just want to earn back your trust, Mom," he said one evening as we ate a simple dinner of soup and bread. "That will take time, Kevin," I replied, watching him carefully over the rim of my bowl. The test came on the 3rd night. I had an old digital voice recorder that Mr. Peterson had found for me, small and easy to hide. Earlier that day, while Kevin was outside, I had placed it on a high shelf in the main room, behind a stack of old books. That evening, I told him I was feeling tired and was going to bed early. "Good night, Mom," he said, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You get your rest." I went into my bedroom and closed the door, but I didn't go to sleep. I waited. For almost an hour there was silence. And then I heard it. The soft murmur of his voice. He was on the phone. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against the cold wood. I could hear his side of the conversation clearly. "No, she has no idea," he was whispering, his voice urgent. "She's a sentimental old woman, she's actually falling for this. She thinks I'm here to help." He gave a short, ugly laugh. "Listen, I need you to get the paperwork ready. It's a power of attorney document, but it needs to look like something else, something simple. An insurance form, maybe. Once I get her signature, we can liquidate the timber rights immediately. We'll be out of this mess in a week." There was a pause. "What about her?" No, after this, she's going straight into Golden Meadows just like we planned. She won't be in any condition to fight it. Now just have it ready. I think I can get her to sign it tomorrow." I backed away from the door, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. That was it. The last flicker of hope I might have had for him, the last maternal instinct to believe in the good inside him, was extinguished forever. He hadn't changed. He never would. He was a snake, and I had foolishly invited him back into my home. The next morning I was up before him. I made coffee. I retrieved the voice recorder. When he came into the main room, stretching and yawning, I was sitting at the table waiting. "Morning, Mom," he said cheerfully. "Slept well." "Like a log," I said, my voice flat. I slid the small black recorder across the table towards him. "You know, Kevin, it's amazing what you can hear when the mountains are quiet." He looked at the recorder, then at my face. He didn't understand. I reached out and pressed the play button. His own voice filled the small cabin. "She's a sentimental old woman, she's actually falling for this. Straight into Golden Meadows just like we planned." I watched the color drain from his face. He stared at the recorder as if it were a scorpion, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. The cheerful mask of the repentant son dissolved, revealing the terrified, greedy fraud underneath. He had walked right into my trap. He had failed the final test. And now judgment was here. He lunged for the recorder, but I was faster. I snatched it away and held it tight. "Don't even think about it," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Mom, I can explain," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "Can you, Kevin? Can you explain away your own voice plotting to defraud your mother and lock her away? Can you explain how you looked me in the eye and lied for 3 straight days? There's nothing to explain. There's only the truth. And the truth is you are a parasite." I stood up, the full weight of my 75 years feeling not like a burden, but like a mountain of righteous anger. "I gave you one last chance. A final opportunity to show me you had a soul. And you used it to sharpen your knife for one last stab in my back." He just stood there, speechless, utterly defeated. The recording was undeniable. His scheme was exposed. "Get your things," I said, my voice echoing his own words from that horrible day. "And get off my property. Now." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just packed his bag in a stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief. He had been so sure of his own cleverness, so certain of my weakness. He couldn't comprehend that he had been outplayed. As he walked towards the door, I said one last thing. "Don't ever call me again. Don't ever write. As of this moment, you are no longer my son. Your father would be ashamed of you." That was the blow that finally broke him. A single, dry sob escaped his lips before he stumbled out the door and drove away for the last time. I didn't watch him go. I just sat at the table, the little black recorder in my hand, and felt a profound, quiet peace settle over me. It was over. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Sarah, my lawyer, was ecstatic when I played her the recording. "This is it, Eleanor," she said, her eyes shining. "This is the nail in his coffin. It's proof of intent to commit fraud. He won't have a legal leg to stand on." And he didn't. The judge granted my claim of adverse possession, officially making me the sole legal owner of the land and all its assets. The day the deed was put in my name, I cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure, unadulterated relief. We signed a carefully managed, sustainable logging contract with a reputable company for the black walnut trees, ensuring the forest would remain healthy. Then we entered into a lucrative leasing agreement with a major beverage corporation for the bottling rights to the mineral spring. The money that started to come in was more than I could have ever imagined. I was by any definition a wealthy woman. But I wasn't interested in revenge. I could have sued Kevin into oblivion. I could have had him prosecuted. I chose a different path. A path of pure, cold justice. Sarah took the recording of Kevin's phone call. She didn't send it to the police. She sent a copy of it to the lawyer representing the bank that was suing him for his defaulted loans. She sent another copy to the investors he had swindled. The recording was irrefutable proof of his character, of his willingness to commit fraud. His creditors, who might have been willing to negotiate a settlement, suddenly had all the leverage they needed. They came after him with everything they had. I heard through Mr. Peterson that Kevin lost everything. The big house in Charlotte. The cars. Every last penny. Tiffany left him, of course. The last anyone heard, he was working a low-wage job somewhere in another state, buried under a mountain of legal debt. He wasn't in jail, but he was living in a prison of his own making. I hadn't destroyed him. I had simply stepped out of the way and let his own actions crush him. I used the money to bring the cabin back to life. I hired the best local craftsmen, men who, like Frank, respected the wood and the stone of the mountains. We didn't tear it down. We restored it. We rebuilt the porch, installed new windows, and ran electricity and plumbing. We turned the derelict ruin into a beautiful, warm, comfortable home. Over the stone fireplace, I hung a simple carved wooden plaque. It just said, "The Frank Vance Homestead. Established in love." My other children, the ones who had always been kind but had lived too far away to see the full extent of Kevin's deception, came to visit. They brought their families, my grandchildren. Seeing them run through the woods, their laughter echoing through the trees, filled the hollow places in my heart. They were shocked and horrified when I finally told them the whole story about Kevin. There was sadness, but there was also understanding. They saw that I had done what I had to do. The cabin became a place of healing, a place of family. We'd have big Sunday dinners, the table laden with food, the air filled with chatter. In those moments, I felt richer than any bank account could ever make me. I also wanted the land to do more good. I used a portion of the money to establish a charitable trust in Frank's name, the Vance Mountain Trust, dedicated to preserving the forests in our county and providing scholarships for local kids who wanted to study environmental science. The land that had saved me would now help to save others. I never heard from Kevin again. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, a flicker of sadness will pass through me for the little boy he once was. A mother's love is a strange, stubborn thing. It never completely dies, even when it's been betrayed. But I know that loving someone doesn't mean you have to let them destroy you. It doesn't mean you have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. My story isn't really about getting rich. It's about getting my dignity back. It's about a 75-year-old woman who was told she was useless, and who discovered she was priceless. It's about understanding that your worth is not determined by how others treat you. It's determined by your own resilience, your own integrity, and your own refusal to be broken. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I felt it was important to share. I have a question for all of you watching. Have you ever reached a point where you had to choose between your own self-respect and a toxic family relationship? How did you find the strength to choose yourself? If my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more real stories from real people. You are not alone, and your strength is greater than you know.